Shouldn't be too much longer, and we will get started. Hey! Okay, so this is making your self-published book look good. Hello to everybody joining us in Zoom and over on Twitch. I'm Starla Huchton. I have been working as an author, and I'm an audiobook narrator, and more pertinent to this panel, I am a book cover designer. I work freelance with indie authors and small presses. Anybody who wants to pay me, basically. You can find all of my stuff at starlahuchton.com. And with me today, going to talk to you about how to make the very important inside of your book look good is actually my husband, Scott
Hello.
Huchton.
Hello, all. I'm going to spare you from looking at my face anymore and share some stuff here. Welcome to this, the interior of your book look good. I'm going to do the interior portion, then I'm going to pass it over to Starla to do the cover and all that. First off, we're going to provide a PDF with links at the end of the presentation, so don't worry too much about trying to copy anything down. We'll get it to you. Okay, let's see. Switching gears here. Like, who am I? My name is Scott. My wife is Starla. She's the host. I got into laying out books because I'm married to an author. She's published roughly 25 books, and we needed someone to lay them out. And we had InDesign, so I learned it. I'm a retired Navy guy. I write software for a living right now. So importantly, I'm not a professional book designer, but I've done it a lot. So I'm going to pass on some of my experiences here. And some of my failures. The first book I ever laid out, I used a program called LaTeX because I was a grad student and I thought that would be a really cool way to lay out a book. It was neat. I don't recommend it. It's not the right tool for the job. So we're going to talk about what are the right tools for the job. Originally, I was going to try and do a demo, but I just didn't have enough time in the time allotted here. There's hundreds of them out there, and I'll link to a few. But since this isn't a workshop, I wouldn't really have too much time to go in depth on anything. So we're going to talk more about what tools are available and give you hopefully just enough of a jumping off point to feel comfortable to start experimenting on this. All right, so here's the overview of what we're going to talk about. Getting started, you have your manuscript. How do you get started? And why do we use publishing software? Then we're going to talk about the software available, a couple of options, and then I'm going to finish up my portion of it with some hints, tips, and links and resources. And again, we're going to provide those as a download later. So getting started here, you have your manuscript. How do you get started? The combination of your trim size, your margins, your font face, your font size, the page layout, and all that, it's going to determine how many pages your book will be in the end. For trim size, for fiction, you're going to go with the standard trade paperback size, which is maybe 5.5 by 8.5 to 6 by 9. I typically use 5.06 by 7.81 because that's what all of Starla's books have been. But you're going to need to set your margins, your bleed, your page layout, your font face, and things like that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But you need to set your inner margins slightly larger than the other margins. That takes care of the spine. I typically use 0.625 for the inner margins and 0.5 for all the others, and that is about a 300-page book. But there's resources available to tell you how much. So when you're first starting off, if you have no idea, that's a pretty good place to start. I'm not going to talk too much about bleed because unless you're doing an art type book where you're going all the way to the edge, you don't have to worry about that. You can set it to 0. Page layout, that's kind of dealer's choice. You take a look at a book that you admire and base your page design off of that. And choose a font face for your book. So fiction tends to use serif fonts like Garamond or Bakersville. I use Garamond for almost all of mine. So taking a look at a page layout, I'm going to go over some of the fundamentals of things I was talking about here. This is just a shot from one of the books I laid out, For the Love of Christmas. This is an InDesign screenshot, but you can see here that the inner margins are a little bit wider than the outer margins. These are 0.625, like I said. I chose to use small caps for the title of the book away from the margin in the upper left-hand corner on the left-hand side page or a verso page in English language books. And then the author's name in small caps on the upper right hand or recto side, and then page numbers in the middle. However, if you look at published books, it runs the gamut. Maybe you put your page number at the top, maybe the page number is away from the margin, not centered. You have some choices there. But in this case, this is laid out with Garamond at font size 11. All right, so let's talk a little bit. I'm going to come back to this a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit about the software that we use and why would we use it. You have a lot of choices. I know a lot of people write their book, they're going to use Scrivener to write their book, or maybe just Microsoft Word. So, okay, I have my book. Why do I need this other software? So I'm going to talk about why we need that, and also what are a couple of choices you have available to you. I'm not really watching the chat right now, so I'm going to come back and look at questions a little bit later. So if anybody's asking questions, I'm not ignoring you. I'll get to you. I'm going to go through this stuff first, and then I'll come back to it. Okay, so why can't I just use Microsoft Word, right? You wrote your manuscript in Word. Why do we need desktop publishing software? So you want your book to look good in print. Word processors, they're not designed for this. They're designed to get your words on the page. You may want your book in EPUB format, and you might think, oh no, I want it in Mobi format or Kindle format, but in any case, word processors don't natively support this, and if they do, they just add a bunch of garbage that you don't actually want. You want consistent styles and formatting throughout, and layout software has tools built in to help with that. You want to use templates and master pages to ensure that each chapter of your book looks the same as all the other chapters, and then all the styles are the same between chapters. And you want complete control over the output with regards to margins, gutters, bleed, page formatting, and all that. So layout software enables all this. So I'm going to move on and talk about a couple of the options that are out there. I'm going to talk about 3 options. I'm sure there are many more, and they kind of go from the less professional but less expensive option up to the professional and very expensive option. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Scribus. It's a viable option if you don't have the money or want to spend the money on layout software. It's 100% free. It's part of the LibreOffice suite, which if you're not familiar with that, it's an open source alternative to Microsoft Office. It runs on almost any operating system you can think of. I mean, it has a version for OS2. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's a really old operating system that I haven't seen in a long time. So it runs on anything. The cons of it is that it's open source. I know I said that was a pro. It's also a con because you're kind of on your own. And there's not as many tutorials specifically for Scribus. But the things I'm going to talk about as far as design are pretty universal under publishing software. So the things that you would learn using InDesign will work in Scribus and vice versa. And one other thing I noticed when I installed Scribus is it might require you to install additional software, specifically Ghostscript, to take advantage of all the fonts and everything. And again, that's another open source project. It's free. And in the resources that we're going to hand out, there's a link to a tutorial for Scribus. The next one I want to talk about is Affinity Publisher. I think as of this presentation, it costs about $49.99, so this is not a free option, and you can get it for either Windows or Mac, but you have to buy a license for whatever operating. It's not one license for everything. You either have a Windows license or a Mac license, and I think at least last night when I checked it, it was on sale for $29.99, so it is on sale. It's made by a company called Serif. They're fairly new to the game. I think they're looking to fill the void that Adobe left when it went to a subscription model. Affinity Publisher was released in 2019 as an alternative to InDesign. And most of the techniques I learned in InDesign, I could just directly use an Affinity Publisher without having to relearn anything. So that's what I was talking about. And like I said, I didn't really use Scribus too much, but when I played around with it, I was like, yeah, okay, all the things are here. There's not as polished. The pros of Affinity Publisher is it's a one-time cost. It's not a subscription model. It's commercial software, so there's a company behind it if you have any issues. Their section manager is really nice. It allows you to control, your chapter breaks and maybe your front matter and your back matter, so that you can control page numbering. That becomes a deal. You don't want to start your book on page 10 because you had a bunch of copyright and stuff in front of it. And it very much like Adobe has integration with Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer. So a photo is their version of Photoshop and Designer is their version of Illustrator. And so if you have all of those installed, it provides integration that is pretty nice, especially if you're trying to put images and resize things. The con of it, it's not InDesign, it's relatively new, so there's not as many tutorials out there. However, the company has put out a lot of video tutorials, and the documentation is actually really good to help you set everything up. So again, those links are going to be in the resource document that we provide. All right, next, InDesign. Okay, it's the 800-pound gorilla of layout software, and it's like the old saying, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, right? There's a lot of tutorials out there, a lot of community support. It's part of Creativity Suite, so if you're already using Photoshop or Illustrator or any of the other Acrobat or any of that stuff, and you have Creativity Suite, then you probably already have access to InDesign. One thing I liked about InDesign that wasn't in Affinity is it has the concept of a book, so you can create all your chapters and individual documents and then use a book to organize them, and that made things a little bit easier. It has its drawbacks too, because if you change one, then you have to go back and change a bunch of other stuff too. But overall, the book is a nice feature that I like in InDesign for book layout. The other really cool thing about InDesign is if you need a font, it's probably included. They have an excellent font manager, and the license allows you to use it in your projects. So the con of it is obviously cost. It's the most expensive option. It's a subscription model, so it's, I think, $20.99 a month, and that's for 12 months. Be forewarned, if you sign up for that, it's $20.99 for 12 months. If you cancel after 2, they're going to charge you for the next 10 months. I think there might be some other subscription models that are more expensive that allow you to just pay month to month, but just know that when you sign up for it, you're signing up for 12 months. All right. So let's talk about some of the concepts that I mentioned. I'm going to try and do a little bit of a demo here. To just illustrate these publishing software concepts, but your master page is sort of the template for your book. It helps to keep the design consistent throughout. Character styles are going to be the things that are applied to characters, and that includes things such as the font, the weight, whether it's italics or bold or anything like that. And paragraph styles are going to be applied to paragraphs, and that includes things like indents, line spacing, word spacing, so more like the layout of the paragraph itself. So I'm actually going to go ahead and finish up, and then I'm going to come back and demo a little bit of that. I'm going to just give you a couple of tips. This is kind of the third section I was talking about of things that I wish I'd have known when I first started doing this. Do not try to lay out the print book and the ebook in the same project. They are different design goals, and that path is just pain and misery. The print book, you want to lay that out, and then you can copy it over or whatever, or I would just start over and do the ebook. And that's really specifically to InDesign, because Scribus and Affinity don't have ebook export. So that's really just an InDesign tip. But DocX is not your friend. Microsoft, at least newer versions, save to DocX format by default. And when I import that into anything, it's all kinds of messed up with the formatting. So the easy fix is just to save it as a doc format or rich text format, and import or place the text using that. It'll maintain your formatting and doesn't cause issues. I don't know what DocX does that those don't, but it's not friendly to InDesign or publisher. Don't get bogged down with all the options. There's hundreds of thousands of options in these programs, and the defaults are probably sufficient. So unless you think you need to change something, or you know you need to change something, don't. It's probably set up correctly already. Pay attention to font and image licensing. If you're not using InDesign, if you are using InDesign, you're probably already paying for the font license. But if not, you can go find the fonts and purchase them. They're not terribly expensive, but you want to make sure that you're covered under a license. Or go to Google. They have all kinds of beautiful free fonts at their fonts.google.com, and you can download them, and those are available to use. They're open source. If you generate an EPUB and it needs some formatting help, there's a program called Sigil that can be useful. It does require a little bit of knowledge of HTML and CSS to be a power user of it, but it does help when you're editing the ebook version. And I'm not really going into a lot of the ebook part, but if you're using InDesign, it does have an EPUB export. Just if you have a library card and you have access to Safari books online, which a lot of libraries do, Adobe has their InDesign classroom in a book. That's how I got to it. I mean, you can buy that too from Adobe or from Amazon, but the library probably has it in their Safari ebooks if you have access to that. But that's sort of a workshop that'll work you through the advanced versions of everything, or the advanced techniques in InDesign. Here's my checklist of just the basic things I look for when I'm done laying out a book. I look for orphaned or dangling paragraphs. That's like where you have the one sentence on the top of a page. There's no magic to fix it. You just have to adjust the margins or the word spacing or the paragraph indentation or maybe the space between the sentences. Just you have to adjust something to fix that, but be subtle. You don't want one chapter of your book to look completely different than the rest of your book. Start pages on the right side. I know that probably, I don't know. The first time I laid it out, I kept looking at a book going, why does that not look right? And it was because I had laid it out and just wherever the last chapter ended, I started the next one. But if you need to, insert a blank page on the left-hand side if the previous chapter ended on the right page so that all your chapters start on the right page. Justify the text with the last line left justified. That's just so that the paragraphs go from side to side and they're even on the left and the right side. Publishing software has something called Preflight, and that will go through and check for errors, make sure that you're not missing a font. These are not like spelling or grammar errors. This is literally like, hey, you don't have a font, or I can't find this graphic that you tried to insert. Preflight the book and correct those errors before you generate it. Use typographer's quotes, probably if you're importing from Word or rich text format, and that's what Scrivener uses by default, then it's already done for you. But just check for that. Go back and fix it if it's not right. And once you do publish the book to PDF, go through it again and make sure that nothing got messed up in the translation. I'm going to talk about a couple of resources available. If all this is a little bit much and you just really want to get a book out there, Draft to Digital will do most of this for you. Kindle Direct Publishing has step-by-step guides to get your book into the Amazon market, but it also just has a lot, like I said, when you need a reference for the margins or something like that, hey, I have 300 or I have 500 pages in this book. How big do my margins need to be? You can reference that. Readsy is a blog that's essentially about all of this stuff. It's how to format a book. They have a tool that will do it for you, albeit you won't have very much control over it, but or they just have a lot of articles that are in the same vein as this presentation. I like this 10 typesetting rules for the indie authors. It's kind of my checklist, but a lot more comprehensive. It's going to talk about, the different types of hyphens that you can use and things like that. And again, here's the link to Google Fonts, and Starla will post that. So I have a couple of minutes, and I was going to maybe switch over here, and if I can, yeah, I'm going to stop sharing for a sec, and then I'm going to switch over to Affinity for a second and show kind of what I was talking about with this. So this is Affinity Publisher. It looks kind of like InDesign 2019-ish. InDesign has recently updated their interface, so it's a little bit different, but I want to just sort of show what I was talking about with character styles and paragraph styles. All these paragraph styles are laid out under, this is a lot of options. You don't have to really go through them. And it's also up here. When you look here, I defined a book main, and book main is Garamond with 11 points. Okay, so if I went through and I said, oh, you know what, actually, I need to be in text mode first. I need to make this section italics. In a word processor, you'd go up and make it italics, but not here. I would come over to the character style and make it. But I already defined the character style because I want it to be uniform throughout. So I go over to my text styles and I say, I want it to be italics. So I say book text italics, and it will make that section italic. So that's what I'm getting at, where it's a little bit different than in Word, because you sort of, I don't know if the word paint your formatting is correct, but it's similar to that, in that you want to define all your styles prior to formatting your book. And then instead of going up and saying, oh, make this section italics, which you could do, but then you run into the issue of not having consistency throughout your book. Say, okay, I have a book style. I base a italic version of that on the book style. And so now I know that if I change anything in book text, it's going to change it throughout the entire software, and my book will maintain its formatting. If you significantly change it, you might have to go back in and redo a bunch of things. So I've hit about the 20-minute mark. I want to pass this over to Starla to let her get through it. I'm going to check chat, and I'll answer questions. And if not, we'll be around in Discord afterwards. So thank you very much for this part of this section, or the presentation, and Starla will take it from here.
All right, so that was a lot of stuff. I'm going to continue the shotgun blast of information. Uh, so what I do, one of my hats is a freelance book cover designer. I got my degree back in 2011 and promptly opened up shop as a book cover designer. And I'm going to take you guys through some resources and some tips for doing it yourself, or other options. All right, so a good cover is going to take a combination of money, time, consideration, and effort. You will either be investing your financial, actual physical money in it, or you are going to be learning a lot of skills. So be prepared going in, that if you don't have the time or the desire to do that, probably want to pass the job off to somebody else. So just make sure you budget and plan appropriately. All right, so if you really want to DIY it, here we go. I am going to share some stuff with you, some tips, and yeah, so here we go. All right, come on, share. There we go. All right, so the first thing I always do is start with the ebook cover. And that's because when I'm doing the ebook cover, it's always larger than the print cover. And you can size down, but you don't ever want to size up. You will lose pixel data. If you try to, I'm losing my train of thought. If you take an image that's small and you try to make it big, it's going to fill in all those missing details with a bunch of pixel noise, basically, and your image is going to look awful. So I always start off with the ebook, because it is larger, it'll be higher resolution, and I can make it as big as I want to. Let's see. So the first thing that you want to do, you want to pick your genre. You want to find out, okay, so say you're writing science fiction, and I have looked to do some research here. What I have pulled up, I have gone to Amazon, and this is the bestsellers in space opera. And I am going to go through these, and I'm going to look for any genre keys, like any cues to the audience that tell them what this book is. And the very first thing I have noticed scrolling through this page, I looked at this earlier, and I think there were only 2 books that used fonts, like this one's kind of weird, but if you look, all of these covers, especially the beginning ones, they are all sans serif fonts. So they're always, they're all very clean, they're all very square, and yeah, you don't have any of these like funny bits hanging off the end, like if you, for example, like Times New Roman has the little serifs on the ends of the letters. Let me see if I can find, I think there was like one. So that one is a stylized font. That is an exception. I know there was like 1 or 2. So here's one you can kind of see on the ends of letters, you have little things sticking out, but like all of these, like here's one, it's a serif font. But yeah, almost every single one of these without exception, it's all serif fonts. Another thing you want to look at is the colors. For science fiction, you see a lot of bright cyan. So check out here, cyan. You see cyan here, you see cyan over here and here. It is all over the place in science fiction. So that's one of the things that you want to keep in mind, because the whole purpose of the book cover is to sell your book. It's to telegraph to the audience what your book is about, and to get them, it says it is like this other thing that you like, so you might like this. All right, so this is science fiction. So like I said, you want to look for any imagery, any colors, the different fonts that they use, and go and kind of make a checklist of sorts. I pulled up another genre over here. These are, and there's a reason that I went over here for this particular genre, which you'll see later. But this is Cozy Mysteries, and this is under Crafts and Hobbies. These are the best sellers. So what you see here, you see a lot of like drawing type things. There's a lot of vector artwork. I'll explain that in a minute. But it's all like kind of cute and sweet, and the colors are very bright and vivid. The fonts kind of vary across this one, but usually they'll have a little bit of style to them. So yeah, here you see this is a sans serif font, but it's in a very fun color. Here you see we've got some more like scripted type ones over here. So that's one of the things that we're looking at for genre. You want, like I said, you want to make your checklist. All right, so the next thing you want to do, what I like to, one of the things that I like to do as I'm doing research for these different covers, I collect inspiration imagery. And one way that you can do that is to go over to like Pinterest, and you create, this is not mine, this is just something I pulled up, what they call a mood board. So things that inspire you, that remind you of your story, different artwork or different book covers that you think you might want to build an image that looks like these, or inspired by these images. So here we see some book covers over here. So this is like children's fantasy. So you see a lot of illustration, a lot of really nice typography here. This was a great mood board, so that's why I pulled it up. There's another one over here. And we can tell just from the gathered images that this is very like science and technical. So this is very likely for a nonfiction book. And here you see nonfiction. Another nonfiction book. Yeah, what you want to do is just like collect some inspirational stuff and work with that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about, you want to start assembling actual pieces for your book cover. You have a good idea of what you want it to look like, right? So we were talking about Cozy Mysteries before. So what I have done, I've actually already started this process a little bit. I have gone over to Deposit Photos. They have some really excellent deals that pop up on like AppSumo. You can get 100 download credits for like, the deals vary. I've seen them for $29. I've seen them for $49. Here you can buy, you know, them for 80 cents for 100 images, or 80 cents for one image for 100 images, sorry. So that's $80. So if you find one of these deals like on AppSumo, then you'll get a much better deal. And 100 stock photos, if you are not a cover designer by trade, that will last you a very long time. So we were talking about Cozy Mysteries. So what I'm looking at is vector artwork, which you see here. And I have decided this particular book, it is a series of books, and that's important, set in a small town, and each one takes place at a different location. So I need to find artwork that represents each of these locations. When you're talking about stock imagery, obviously you don't have to use Deposit Photos. There are a ton of stock sites out there. I don't try to recommend like the free sites, because there are some, because it's a little difficult for those sites to guarantee that those images haven't been pirated. It puts you at risk for legal action. There are places that you can get stuff for free. Like I believe NASA has their entire image library available for free for whatever purpose you want to use it for. Uh, so that's great for like science fiction writers because you can get all the space backgrounds you need. Um, but yeah, so things like Unsplash, there have been some issues where photographers have had their stuff uploaded without permission, and people are taking it and using it and assuming that it's okay. Um, yeah, you have to be wary of that, and paying for the stock imagery is always your best bet. When you pay for stock imagery, you always want to check the licensing agreement, especially if you're working on material that is, so some of these stock sites specifically, they state that you cannot use them to depict like, it's kind of archaic, but you can't depict like LGBTQ relationships, or they can't be manipulated to depict scenes of a sexual nature. So you always have to be very careful in reading your licensing agreements to see what you can and cannot use them for. Typically for self-published authors, unless you're going to be selling upwards of 500,000 copies, your standard royalty-free license is going to be okay. Trying to see if they have file info. Yeah, I don't see it. Like you would have to go to the actual. Anyway, all of that stuff, like the licensing stuff, is all available for you to check out. I don't have time to go over it all, but anyway, so yeah, when you are searching for stock imagery, things to consider while you're doing this, there's a lot. Is it for a series? If it's for a series, you want like people on the cover, you need to be looking for models with multiple shots available, like in varied poses or outfits, or they have heads that can be easily swapped out in the various photo manipulation programs, which I have done many times. Stock searches are always very time intensive. Uh, it's never going to be quick. To do really good searches, you want to start with using broad keywords to begin, and then you can narrow it down using terms from like the image titles and the tags. So if I go to one of these pages, like if I click on this and it brings me here, like I can scroll down and see what some of the keywords are because I really like this picture and I want more pictures like it. So maybe this particular one isn't quite right, but I want, something similar. So I can look at these keywords and do searches with these, and that will maybe bring up some more ideas that I hadn't thought of before to search for. Another resource for finding like similar images, if you've never done a stock photo search. So like you would click on this and you will see down here similar images, and you can see more of those. You can see ones by the same author. They used to have another tab, it said same series, and they keep changing things. So improvements, I believe they call it. But yeah, so you can, open those in new windows or new tabs or on the same page. And you can often find artwork that will be along the same line as what you're looking for. Let's see. You can always specify over here, like there's a lot of different filters. Like if you're looking for people, you can do people only, however many people you want. You can do isolated only. There's a lot of different filters you can use. All right, so for this particular project, I have collected a whole bunch of these that were in this series because I wanted to make sure that I had enough, to continue going for a million years because I want to write a ton of cozy mysteries. So like I've got all of these, but I like, where is the one that I chose? Cinema, here we go. I want to do something, my first story is based at a movie theater. So I like this one, so I'm going to choose this one and I'm going to download it as a vector. You can download it as a JPEG. We'll talk about that in a bit. But there's something else that I need as well. I need something to represent my main character, because if you look at these, like here you see animals and stuff, but you see a lot of depictions of people here on these covers, and I want to replicate that look. So I've actually selected this one here. And I like this because this has a wide variety of poses. I can change the arms in the different editing programs. I can change the colors on the clothing. I can change her hairstyle. I can change her facial expression. So that gives me a bazillion options to work with across this whole series of books. So like I said, that's something you want to keep in mind. If you're working on a standalone, not as important, but a lot of people write series these days just because it's more attractive to the audience when they know they've got something else lined up right after that. If they like it, they can just pick up the next one. All right, so there's a lot of different places you can find stock imagery. Deposit Photos is one of my favorites. There's iStock Photos, Shutterstock, 123RF. Adobe has a wide selection. Dreamstime. There's a ton of others, and I list a whole bunch of them in that PDF that I've posted the link to in the chat. There are specific websites that have made it their business to cater to like people who create book covers, and so they have a long series of shots with dedicated to like entire galleries of just like one model in a different pose, like small variations or with different props. So those are really, really good, especially if you're doing something like PNR, paranormal romance, or like urban fantasy, and you want the same character, the same physical actual human being across your entire series. So you got places like Neostock, Bewitching Bookstock, Stocklarium, Period Images, the Killian Group, all sorts of things. And like I said, I've got a whole bunch of them in that PDF. All right, so moving on from there, now that we have our stock images, now that we have, images rounded up, we need to actually build a cover, right? So I have 3 options for you. Now, Amazon has a cover creator. I 100% do not recommend it. Every example I've ever seen that came out of Amazon cover creator looks like garbage. Don't do it. Please don't. If you need something absolutely free and very simple to use, this is a good option. This is Canva, and what's great about them is that they have templates. So it takes out some of the guesswork for you. So like, here's what the interface looks like. I have so many tabs open, it's ridiculous. But yeah, they have a whole bunch of templates that you can look through, in various different genres and everything. And it's really just plug and play. So what I've actually done, I already built one. I found a stock image that I really liked and built a cover around it. So I just uploaded it, dropped it after I purchased it, dropped it into the background. And then they had text that was already, it was a template, and I just plugged in this other stuff to it. I added this because originally it was just the title and then the author name below it. I wanted it up here. It's literally just a matter of dragging things around. You can change the colors up here, the sizes over here, the fonts over here. It's ridiculously easy. The drawback, so while this looks fine, it's great, if you go to download it, it's not, you're not going to get a great size, and the resolution is very small. You're not going to get a 300 dpi image, not for free anyway. They do have a pro option. It's $12.95 a month, or like $120 annually. So that's an option that you can do, but like it's an okay cover. This is fine. This is passable. It's pretty standard. Looks good. Not my, I mean, yeah, it's not ideal for a lot of reasons, but it will work. All right, so next I'm going to talk to you about just a little bit, because this isn't my wheelhouse right here. Scott talked to you about Affinity Publisher. I am going to talk to you about Affinity Photo, which is kind of like their Photoshop analog. So it's got kind of like your same price point, $50, but right now they've got their big half off sale. So it's actually half price. They do have an iPad version as well that's like even half of that. So I think it's on sale for like 10 bucks right now. But I built one cover in here, and this one is open recent here. This is a nonfiction book cover. That I think this took me like 30 minutes. I don't have a ton of experience with Affinity Photo. The things are kind of like scattered a little. They're all arranged a little differently, and in the functionality is slightly different. I didn't get as much opportunity as I wanted to play with it to tell you like there's a ton of tutorials and everything available out there. Not as widely used, I think, as Photoshop, but it is the cheaper option. Like Scott talked about all of that stuff with Affinity Publisher, and the same applies to Affinity Photo. So this is what I was able to do. It's just the background, a single image, and some text. And this I modified with like some perspective warping. But yeah, so that, I mean, it's very basic, but you know, it'll work. I'm sure if I took the time to like really develop some skill with Affinity Photo, I could probably do a lot of the same things that I do with Photoshop. But like I said, I haven't fully explored it. So, all right. But the last option that you have, just kind of the gold standard, is this is just a screenshot. So this is a screenshot of Photoshop, and I laid out this cozy mystery cover in Photoshop. I actually didn't use just Photoshop because to edit uh, the different vector images that I had pulled from the stock site, I used Adobe Illustrator because it's much easier. You can absolutely do it in Photoshop. It's just a little more difficult. It's more time consuming and a little more finicky, but yeah, so I've changed a little bit of the coloration, some of the background stuff that was there I took out. I changed her arm. I gave her a different arm pose because I didn't like it, and I altered the color a little bit, and then I threw on some text. So this is my cozy mystery cover. That's your example. Yeah, so okay, what do we got next? So yeah, like I said, Photoshop is the professional standard. It's 20 like $21 a month. That's if you commit to a full year. If you do not commit to a full year, it's $31.49 a month. So that they have different plans that you can use. And that's, I think, just for Photoshop. All apps are more, if you want the entire Creative Cloud suite, that'll be either like $53 or $79.50, depending on your commitment. But that'll get you, all the apps will get you InDesign and Illustrator and Photoshop and Audition and all kinds of stuff. All right. So I'm having to cut out a lot of the stuff that I wanted to talk about with these covers, but okay. So I have to talk about print covers next. Scott, one of the things that I had Scott do for this is Love Songs, Detours, etc. I did a mock-up of this so you can, I wanted to show him how I wanted it to look. Because yeah. I'm the artistic one. He's the one that makes it happen. I have all the big ideas, and he's responsible for the execution. But yeah, so this is what I had him do for Love Songs, Detours, etc. I was working on placement and layout to see how it would look. Those things I edited in Photoshop. So I'm going to close these here. So when you're talking about your actual print book, you need to figure out what size you need for the print cover. And to do that, Amazon, Kindle Direct Publishing, has this page here for getting your template for laying out the print spread. So they, so for KDP, you have to keep in mind that, okay, so this is the most common services due to the large platform, the ease of use, and the low cost. You do have fewer size options than you do on some other platforms. but they provide you a free ISBN. So this is where you would go to get your cover template. You'd put in your page count here, and whether you wanted white or cream paper, because colored paper, that's for like if you're doing like a photo book. And then you would just hit download. So this is what that will look like. And this was one that I actually laid out. I've blocked out all of the important stuff. But yeah, so this is what the template for that looks like. I put guides up to remind myself, just to keep in mind where my trim was and where the spine goes. And so you know how to line up the different imagery there. The second most common layout that I do is for Ingram Spark. But that process is a little more in depth. It has a wider range of options for trim sizes. You can do paperback or hardcover, and various different bindings. It does require the purchase of an ISBN. Now, Ingram Spark has a deal that you can purchase an ISBN through them for like $85 if you go through Ingram Spark. If you decide to go directly to Bowker.com, and that's for US people, to get your ISBN. They are $125 for single, or you can get a pack of 10 of them for $295. If you are going through Ingram Spark to do your print-on-demand book, you have to have an ISBN. Okay, so you would have to put in all of this information, and then down here, if you have InDesign, it will send you an InDesign file, but if you are not using InDesign, I recommend getting a PDF. And so this is what that looks like when when you get the template. So this is the PDF version, open in Photoshop. All right. So another thing that I do when I do the cover is that I have made it my practice to provide a transparent background PNG file of the text treatment. Now, this can be used in a couple of ways. It can be used on the title page to make your interior look nicer. Or when I give these out, I give out a black version, I give one out that's in white, and I give out the color treatment if the book cover, if the title and everything was in color. I also give out that version as well. And that can be used on like different marketing images, like teaser images in your Facebook banners, all of that stuff. All right, I'm really trying to zoom through this. I know I don't have time. I've got like 3 minutes. Okay, so I was going to try to go over marketing images, but I just don't think we have time. Canva has a lot of really great templates for that stuff. They even have templates for like Facebook ads, and you want to keep that to like under 125 characters. They say book covers are an exception, but Facebook likes to do funny things, so don't bank on it. Yeah, I've got a lot of different resources. All these things are linked in the PDF. This was a great one for like audiobook marketing. You can create a little audiogram that plays a sample of audio and stuff, but yeah, so so much stuff. Like you guys don't know, like I could talk about this, I could give like entire hours and hours of information here. And so I think you have now seen the very distinct difference between myself and my husband, because he's very organized and I clearly am not. But yes, so we have 2 minutes left. We are going to hop over to Discord when this is done. So if you have questions and stuff, they're cutting. We have to vacate the Zoom room, but we will be over on the Balticon Discord in the after panel chat room, and that will be what is it? The literary reading and writing room there. So if you have any questions, I will stick around for as long as you guys need to answer questions. Thank you guys so much. Really, really appreciate you coming, and yeah,